1. How is the housing question to be settled then? In present-day society, just as any other social question is settled, by the gradual economic leveling of demand and supply, a settlement which reproduces the question itself again and again and therefore is no settlement. Frederick Engels, The Housing Question. Broad internalization of such discursive regimes as taming the frontier, advancing civilization, leading the free world, or ridding the world of terror causes spontaneous consent, the prerequisite for hegemony, thus enabling imperial conduct abroad while reinforcing domestic hierarchies. Walter Hickson, The Myth of American Diplomacy. According to Maxwell's second law of thermodynamics, the entropy in a system will increase unless new energy is put in. The city, the polis, is struggling to grow and to change, perhaps even toward the day when the idea of the human is recognized in the energy, the life impulse, and actions of each human being. Labius Woods. Identities and memories are not things we think about, but things we think with. John Gillis. 2. In the vast folded landscape is a field of carbon husks. Some are tall and rigid like soldiers in long lines describing perimeters through the yellow hills. Below, others spread out like a dark pool, like a black lake spotted with trees. Between them, green lines of avenues reveal an irregular and curving grid. The husks occupy plots of what was a city on the plain below the hills, where now only a few skeletal towers rise from a thick forest that stretches to the distant line of mountains, which fall into the misty coast. You begin cutting down the steep ridges toward the husks. The only sounds are the wind in the long grass, mice and other small creatures, birds, a hawk overhead, and your footsteps on the soft, dry ground. The first line of carbon vigils stand every 20 feet and are each the size of a young tree, maybe 10 feet tall and top-heavy. Near them you can hear a soft noise like radio static coming from them. Their far side is concave and porous like a sponge. It glows faintly in the depths of chaotic layers. Looking down the line of tall, silent husks with glowing bellies, you notice some unusual mounds in the grass, repetitive and too regular to be natural. As the sun has moved into afternoon, shadows indicating more mounds visibly dot the hills, hundreds around you, concentrated on the flat lowlands. You approach the closest mound. It is 40 feet long and half as wide, taller than you, and thickly overgrown. Some digging reveals stained but intact concrete. Down the hill, past more buried magazines, through more lines of dark, crackling husks, you cross a low stream grown around with willows, cottonwoods, oaks, and ashes. The sound of a woodpecker nearby, and startled lizards running across the rocky creek bed. As you approach the edge of the grid of low-lying husks, they are much larger than their sentinel counterparts. They are squat and arched and very dark, like caves turned inside out. They reflect almost none of the orange light that casts long blue shadows. They are maybe 12 feet tall, 40 feet wide. They touch the ground with irregular arms that reach down from their domed tops. Grass, low bushes, and intermittent trees grow between them, up to their edges and under them. They sit like discarded insect skins, dark and inert, in curving rows back as far as you can see. You touch a carbon wall. A shower of sparks expands from your finger like a ripple, cascading around the dome and down the legs. The husks are left by an early experiment in carbon nanofiber technology, carbon sponges grown on long-decayed wooden scaffolding. Their intertwined layers wind up like clockwork under solar radiation, and the lightest electric contact instigates an electric cascade. Carbon nanofiber sponges are up to 1,000 times more conductive than copper and have 300 times the strength-to-weight ratio of steel. They are 90% air. When a microbial virus swept through global urban centers, killing bioengineered infrastructure and buildings, devastating civilization, the carbon nanofiber shells of skyscrapers remained like corpses, monuments of nature's blind destruction until they were torn down. The sun became a global economic driver. The United States, the largest producer of solar panels and batteries, and with huge tracts of sky-facing land, made atmospheric pollution a political priority. With newly available funding, genetic engineers and mechanical engineers collaborated on a series of new materials. They grew carbon nanofiber scaffolds as cheap, scalable, lightweight, bendable, architecturally strong wonder hosts for living facades and biological MEP, lab-grown and self-healing. The circulatory and pulmonary systems of buildings came alive. At a certain point, America began to expand upward. The next great land grab was, as it inevitably would be, a sky grab. The expansion was partly to densify coveted urban horizontal territory, but also for huge rural areas of the country to become solar farms. Sky access meant capacity to harvest energy, and the private market rapidly overtook public energy production capacity. Cheap, plentiful energy enabled an unprecedented expansion of the Anthropocene. Downward, upward, outward, inward. 3. Morning fog through the hills sits in the valleys and drifts across the backs of ridges, leaving trails of dew. The carbon sentinels crackle softly in the electrolytic air, and their biophosphorescent innards glow. Fog rises into their hoods, soaks into structural wood members, and excites the proton exchange membrane sitting across them. The humidity pulls bicarbonate crystals of carbon dioxide from the hood's resin and into the membrane, shuttling them across its span until they decouple into carbon and oxygen. Oxygen bubbles into the headspace of the membrane's electrolyzer cells, and carbon molecules rise into bundles of honeycomb nanotubes and loose carbon strands that drift and self-assemble in the current, exchanging bicarbonate and water. The fog burns off and sun strikes the carbon shells. Their strands vibrate and twist, each layer of carbon pulling deeper, denser layers into place, formally manifesting stored energy. Once the sun sets, carbon begins to unwind, shaking loose oxygen stored in the membrane below it. The oxygen falls into luciferin-coated threads stretched across the wood frame so that they glow at night in long green rows. Carbon shells in the fields of the Naval Weapons Station trace old lines of barbed wire fences. Carbon on the houses provides solar energy. As carbon siphoned from atmospheric carbon dioxide accumulates, the roofs of Concord darken and thicken. Family after family begins to meet their energy needs with carbon nanotube solar collectors and finds economic independence from their homes by selling the excess. First local businesses and then nearby steel mills and processing factories switch from grid electricity to cheaper home-generated energy. Power plants gradually shrink into obsolescence, replaced by the aggregate power harvested by millions of homeowners. Subtly, economic and political power shifts into the hands of detached single-family homeowners whose collective sprawl commands huge tracts of sky. As single-family homes grow and diversify economically, facilitating new households and in-home businesses, Concord transitions from a bedroom community to the cultural center of Contra Costa County. In Pittsburgh to the north, single-family terracotta-roofed blue-pooled villas spread across the crest of hills overlooking the Concord Naval Weapons Station Regional Park, and their trucks of grading dirt, 37,000 tons, permanently fill 171 weapons storage magazines, ensuring their longevity. 4. Solar energy collection materials, silicon in solar cells, lithium or cobalt or silver in batteries, and luminescent materials, phosphorus, zinc, strontium, are mined or collected in salt flats of Argentina, in pit mines of the Congo, Chile, and China. Their production is hazardous and their supply limited. They are artificially cheap because they are more valuable than their producers. They sit on your roof and run through your walls. The house rises around you. Wood from trees produced by gas-powered machines, plastic pipes and linoleum floors and asphalt shingles from petroleum byproducts, nickel from Indonesian mines, copper wires, fiberglass insulation produced in industrial smelting plants from sand and limestone, materials collected, disassembled, and recombined in ordered fibers, each step dissociating the product from its origin. Your house feels safe, contained, and human because the ecology has been stripped from every element. The world of your house is clean. You dust and vacuum to remove the debris of passing days, the material deterioration of walls and carpets. Your environment is carefully organized to reinforce your centrality. Lines of production coming from around the world, across time and space, tapping ancient veins of energy and minerals, carried on the backs of countless disposable workers, coordinated by numerous global economic supply chains to deliver raw materials to inhuman-scale factories, all conspiring to bring you the screws in your walls, laminate on your counters, expanse of your carpets, vinyl baseboards, and pristine length of your glass windows. You are presented with the house as an object, divorced from its erection. Your house on its street, in its quiet neighborhood, in its city, with its transit lines and highways, with its glass skyscrapers and green parks and expansive parking lots, plays its role in a vast social mechanism designed to deny its origin, to efface its nature. It's designed to say, you are safe, you are an individual, you are important. Meanwhile, the hills rise behind your house. You see them in postcards advertising your bucolic city. The hills are wrapped in the military's barbed wire. The hills are ancient. In nearby cities without naval bases controlling the territory, you've heard of mountain lions coming down from the hills and mauling people in their backyards. In the 1960s, during the Vietnam War, and again in the 1980s during the Central American crisis, protesters frequently picketed outside the gates of the Naval Weapons Station. They protested the magazines of weapons, white phosphorus that reduced human bodies to messy liquids, nuclear missiles that, like magnets, exerted inert pressure, guns and ammunition, being shipped to American soldiers abroad, or to anti-communist dictators and insurgent groups in Nicaragua and Ecuador. They protested the moral war fought by the United States in the increasingly gray decades after the end of World War II between competing economic political systems, capitalism and communism, a war staged on the moral grounds of evil Axis powers and earlier of noble races versus savage foreigners, the grounds of manifest destiny and continental expansion, the grounds of God-given hegemony, sanctifying global crusades against less enlightened nations. 5. No use to make any philosophies here. I see no God in the holly, hear no song from the snow-broken weeds. Hegel is not the winter yellow in the pines. The sunlight has never heard of trees. Surrendered self among unwelcoming forms. Stranger, hoist your burdens. Get on down the road. A.R. Ammons.